It hits you all at once. The moment you realize you somehow became the problem in a story where you were only trying to love. Everything felt real in the beginning. The connection, the closeness, the quiet understanding that did not need words. You showed up with honesty. You stayed when it was difficult. You gave more when things started slipping, and yet something shifted, not slowly, not gently, but suddenly. The warmth turned cold, the openness turned distant, and the same person who once looked at you like you mattered now looks at you like you're too much, too emotional, too complicated. And that is where the confusion begins, because nothing inside you feels like the villain. You replay every moment, every conversation, every word, searching for the exact point where things broke, searching for the mistake that must have caused this change. But the more you search, the less it makes sense. Instead, something deeper starts to happen. You begin to question yourself. Maybe it was your tone. Maybe you asked for too much. Maybe you should have stayed quiet. Maybe you should have been less sensitive, less present, less you. And without even realizing it, you start carrying a weight that does not belong to you. This is where most people get trapped. Not in the rejection, not in the distance, but in the silent belief that they caused it. And here is the part that almost no one tells you. Most people will never hear this, not because it is hidden, but because they stop too soon. They walk away with the wrong story. They leave believing they were the problem. They carry that belief into the next connection, and the next, and the next, never realizing they were holding something that was never theirs to begin with. Stay with me, because what comes next will completely change how you see this. There is a deeper truth behind that moment when everything turned. A truth that is not obvious, a truth that is not spoken, a truth that most people miss because it hides behind behavior that feels personal but is not. What you're about to understand is not just about them, it is about the hidden mechanics of shame, the kind that does not show itself openly, the kind that cannot be processed easily, the kind that looks for somewhere or someone to go. And when that happens, it does not disappear, it moves quietly, subtly, powerfully. And sometimes it moves onto you. That moment when they pulled away, when they started blaming, when the words began to twist your reality, that was not random. That was not a simple loss of interest. That was not even about incompatibility in the way you think it was. There was something happening beneath the surface, something internal, something they could not face. So it had to be placed somewhere else. And if you were close enough, open enough, connected enough, it was placed onto you. This is the part that feels almost impossible to accept at first. Because it means the pain you felt was real, but the meaning you attached to it might not be. It means the confusion was real, but the story you built around it might not be true. It means the version of yourself that you started questioning might actually be the most honest version of you. And this is where everything changes, because once you begin to see it, you cannot unsee it. You start to recognize patterns you once ignored. You start to feel the difference between what is yours and what never was. You start to understand why no amount of explaining ever seemed to fix anything. Why the more you tried to prove your intentions, the more distant they became. It was never about proof, it was never about fixing. It was never about you becoming better so they could stay. There is something much deeper happening here, something that feels like a test. Not the kind of test that you pass by convincing someone, but the kind you pass by choosing yourself in a moment where everything inside you wants to hold on. And that is why this moment, this exact moment, is so important, because it determines whether you lose yourself or find yourself. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what happened to you. You will understand why you felt the way you did. You will understand why nothing you did seemed to change the outcome. And more importantly, you will finally see what was never yours to carry. There is a reason this experience feels so intense. There is a reason it forces you to look deeper than you have had before. It is not here to break you, it is here to wake you up. And once you see the truth behind it, you will never question yourself the same way again. If this speaks to something deep inside you, if part of you already feels that there is more to this story than what you have been told, then you're exactly where you need to be. Welcome to the channel. If you are ready to understand what most people never do, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear might be the missing piece you have been searching for. There is a truth hiding underneath everything you just experienced, and once you see it, the entire story begins to shift in a way you did not expect. Because what if the way they treated you was never actually about you? That feels difficult to accept at first, almost impossible. Your mind wants to go back to every moment, every word, every reaction, trying to find where you went wrong. But the deeper truth is this: some people are not reacting to you, they are reacting to something inside themselves that they do not understand. And in avoidant dynamics, that something has a name. It is shame. Not the kind of shame people talk about openly, not the kind that leads to apology or reflection. This is a silent internal pressure, a feeling of being exposed, of not being enough, of being seen too deeply, and not liking what is found there. And here is what most people do not realize. Avoidance do not process shame. They escape it. They do not sit with it. They do not unpack it. They do not express it in a healthy way, because to them, shame feels overwhelming. It feels like losing control. It feels like being trapped in something they cannot fix. So their mind does something very fast, very subtle. It redirects it. A lesser known psychological fact is this: the brain is wired to protect identity at all costs, even if it means distorting reality. And for someone who struggles with deep internal shame, the easiest way to protect themselves is to unconsciously place that feeling outside of them, not because they are trying to hurt you, but because they are trying to survive themselves. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. When they pull away, when they become cold, when they start pointing out your flaws or making you feel like you are too much, it looks personal, it feels targeted, it feels like rejection. But underneath that behavior, something else is happening. They are trying to get distance from a feeling they cannot tolerate. And if you are the closest person to them, if you are the one who saw them, understood them, connected with them, then you become the easiest place for that feeling to go. And this is where I starts to affect you in ways you do not immediately notice, because you care. You try to understand, you try to fix, you try to adjust. You listen more, you speak softer, you become more patient, more forgiving, more careful. But slowly, something inside you starts to shift. You begin to feel like you're walking on invisible ground, like one wrong step could push them further away, like your presence itself needs to be managed. And that is not love anymore. That is confusion mixed with responsibility that was never yours. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You are never reacting to reality. You were reacting to something that was being transferred onto you. And the more open your heart was, the more you were willing to carry it. That is why it feels so heavy. That is why it lingers even after they are gone. Because you did not just lose a connection, you absorbed something you were never meant to hold. But this is only the surface of it. Because what happens next is even more subtle and far more powerful. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. What if the emotions that started overwhelming you were never actually yours to begin with. That sounds strange at first, because what you felt was real. The anxiety, the confusion, the heaviness in your chest that did not seem to have a clear source. It all felt personal. It felt like something inside you was breaking. But there is something deeper happening beneath the surface. Something so subtle that most people never recognize it while it is unfolding. It is called projection. And in simple terms, projection is when someone takes a feeling they cannot face within themselves and unknowingly places it onto someone else. Not through words alone, not through direct action, but through energy, behavior, and emotional patterns that slowly reshape how you feel about yourself. They cannot hold their shame, their fear, their sense of not being enough. So, without realizing it, they begin to treat you as if those things belong to you. A lesser known psychological fact is this: humans are highly emotionally contagious. Your nervous system constantly mirrors the emotional state of the person closest to you, even when nothing is being said. This means you can start feeling something simply because someone else cannot process it themselves. And this is where things begin to shift inside you. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. At first, it is barely noticeable. A small comment that feels slightly off, a look that feels distant, a reaction that feels heavier than it should. You brush it aside. You tell yourself they are just stressed, just overwhelmed, just going through something. But over time, it builds. You start feeling responsible for their distance. You start questioning your tone, your words, your presence. You begin to carry a quiet pressure to keep things stable, to keep them from pulling away further. And without realizing it, you are slowly stepping into a role that was never yours. You are holding emotions that did not originate from you. You are carrying a weight that was quietly handed to you, not through intention, but through avoidance. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You were never broken. You were never lost. You were always exactly where you needed to be. Because what you felt was not weakness, it was sensitivity. It was your ability to connect, to empathize, to feel deeply, and that is exactly why this dynamic affects you so strongly. You did not just witness their internal struggle, you absorbed it. And that is why it feels so confusing. Because part of you knows something is off, part of you feels the imbalance, but another part of you keeps trying to fix I. T keeps trying to restore what once felt real. So you give more, you try harder, you become more understanding, more patient, more forgiving. But the more you give, the heavier it becomes, because you are not just giving love anymore. You are carrying pain that was never yours to carry. And the moment you begin to see this clearly, something inside you starts to wake up. You start to question not yourself, but the dynamic. You start to notice patterns instead of blaming your heart. You start to feel the difference between what is yours and what was placed onto you. And that shift, that quiet awakening, is where everything begins to change. But what happens next is where most people lose themselves completely. Because once you start carrying what is not yours, it does not just sit there quietly, it begins to change how you see yourself. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. When did you start trusting yourself and start questioning everything you do? It does not happen all at once. There's no clear moment where you decide to doubt your own heart. It creeps in slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, one small moment at a time, until suddenly you do not recognize the way you think anymore. You begin replaying conversations in your head. Long after they end, you analyze your words, your tone, your timing. You wonder if you said too much or not enough, if you were too emotional or not understanding enough. And the most painful part is this: you used to feel certain about who you were. But now that certainty is gone. A lesser known psychological fact is this: the human brain prioritizes maintaining connection over maintaining self identity. This means when a relationship feels unstable, your mind will often choose to question yourself rather than risk losing the bond. So the doubt you feel is not random, it is your mind T trying to protect the connection, even at the cost of losing yourself. Do not skip this part because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. Instead of stepping back and questioning the situation, you turn inward. You try to fix what feels broken. You become more careful, more aware, more controlled. You start editing yourself before you even speak. You hold back thoughts that once came naturally. You soften your truth to avoid conflict. You tell yourself you're growing. You tell yourself you're learning to love better. But deep down, something feels off. Because love was never supposed to feel like constant self correction. And yet, you keep going, you try harder, you give more, you become more patient, more forgiving, more willing to understand their side. You carry the emotional weight of both people, hoping that if you can just get it right, things will go back to how they were. But they never do. And slowly, you begin to shrink, not physically, not visibly, but internally. The parts of you that were once expressive become quiet. The parts of you that felt confident become uncertain. The parts of you that trusted easily become guarded. You start abandoning pieces of yourself just to keep the connection alive. Here's the truth nobody says out loud: you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to meet you at your depth. And that realization, it hurts because it means all the effort you gave, all the adjusting, all the silent sacrifices were never actually solving the problem. They were slowly disconnecting you from who you really are. And that is why this stage feels so heavy, because it is not just about them anymore. It is about you losing touch with yourself. You wake up one day and feel emotionally exhausted without knowing exactly why. You feel drained even in moments of silence. You feel like you are carrying some helium invisible that never seems to get lighter. And the most confusing part is you still care even after everything, even after the distance, even after the doubt. Part of you still wants to fix it, still wants to be enough, still believes that if you can just understand them better, everything will finally make sense. But there is something you have not seen yet, something that keeps this entire cycle in place. Because the more you try to prove your worth, the deeper you fall into a trap that was never meant to be escaped that way. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. Why does this moment feel so intense? Like everything inside you is being pulled in two different directions at once. Because this is not just another phase in the connection, this is the moment where something deeper is being decided, not by them, by you. It feels heavy because you are standing at a quiet crossroads. One path asks you to keep holding on, to keep proving, to keep adjusting yourself in hopes that things will return to what they once were. The other path is less familiar. It asks you to pause, to question, to see clearly, even if that clarity changes everything. And this is why it is called the final test, because it is not about fixing the relationship anymore. It is about whether you choose yourself or lose yourself trying to keep someone else. A lesser known psychological fact is this: when emotional patterns repeat without resolution, the brain creates what is called a trauma loop, where you feel compelled to stay and solve the pain, even when the situation itself is causing it. This is why walking away can feel harder than staying, even when staying is what hurts you. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. They think the test is about patience, They think the test is about proving loyalty. They think if they just hold on a little longer, love a little deeper, understand a little more, something will finally shift. But that is not the test. The test is whether you can recognize what is happening before you disappear inside it. Because in this moment, you're being pulled into absorbing something that was never yours. Their distance, their confusion, their unprocessed shame, it is all sitting in front of you, waiting for you to take responsibility for it. And if you do, it becomes your burden. You start carrying it as if it belongs to you. You start shaping your identity around fixing it. You start believing that your worth is tied to whether or not you can make this work. And that is where most people lose themselves. Not suddenly, but slowly, one compromise at a time, one moment of silence when you should have spoken, one moment of self doubt when you should have trusted yourself, one moment of choosing them instead of choosing your truth. Here's the truth nobody says out loud. You were never meant to carry someone else's emotional weight just to be loved. And yet, this moment will tempt you to do exactly that because it feels like love is on the line. It feels like if you let go, you lose something meaningful. It feels like walking away means giving up. But what if staying is what is costing you everything? That is the tension you feel right now. That is why your mind keeps going back and forth. Part of you wants to hold on. Part of you is starting to wake up. And the longer you stay in this space, the louder that inner voice becomes. The one that quietly asks, why does this feel so one sided? The one that wonders, why do I feel like I am the only one trying? The one that already knows the answer, but is afraid of what it means. Because choosing your truth requires something that feels almost impossible in this moment. It requires letting go of the illusion, letting go of the version of them you held onto, letting go of the belief that you can fix something that was never yours to fix. And that is why this is the final test. Not because it ends the connection, but because it reveals whether you are ready to come back to yourself. And what happens next is where most people fall into the deepest trap of all. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. Why does the more you try to explain yourself, the more misunderstood you feel? It seems like it should work the opposite way. If something is unclear, you talk it through. If there is distance, you close it with honesty. If there is tension, you resolve it with effort. That is what healthy connection teaches you. But here, something strange happens. The more you explain your intentions, the more they question them, the more you try to clarify your feelings, the more distant they become. The more you open up, the more closed off they seem. And slowly, what started as a simple desire to be understood turns into a constant need to prove that you are not the problem. A lesser known psychological fact is this: when someone has already formed an emotional conclusion about you, their brain begins filtering everything you say through that belief. This is called confirmation bias. It means even your honesty can be interpreted as manipulation. Even your care can be seen as pressure. So no matter how clearly you speak, they are not hearing you the way you intend. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. You believe that if you just find the right words, everything will finally click. So you try again. You explain your side more carefully. You choose softer language. You take responsibility for things that are not even fully yours, just to ease the tension. You try to meet them where they are, even when it feels like they are no longer meeting you at all. And for a moment, it almost feels like it is working. There is a small opening, a brief sense of connection, a tiny bit of hope that things are shifting. But then it closes again, and you're left right back where you started. Except now, you're more tired than before. Because each time you try, you give a little more of yourself. Each time you explain, you invest more energy. Each time you attempt to fix it, you go deeper into something that does not seem to have an end. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You cannot prove your innocence to someone who has already decided to misunderstand you. And that realization, it hits hard because it means the effort you are giving is not leading to clarity, it is leading to exhaustion. You start feeling drained after conversations that used to feel easy. You start overthinking messages, replaying interactions, trying to find where things went wrong again. You feel like you're constantly being evaluated, constantly needing to defend your intentions. And that is not connection, that is emotional survival. You are no longer expressing yourself freely. You're performing, trying to say the right thing, trying to avoid the wrong reaction, trying to keep the peace at the cost of your own peace. And the more you stay in this loop, the further they seem to move away, not because you are doing something wrong, but because the dynamic itself feeds on your effort. The more you chase clarity, the less available it becomes. The more you try to fix the distance, the wider it feels. And eventually, something inside you begins to crack, not loudly, but quietly. A deep frustration that you cannot fully explain, a feeling that no matter what you do, it is never enough. And beneath that frustration, a deeper question starts to form. What if this was never meant to be solved this way? What if all this effort, all this proving, is actually keeping you stuck in the very thing you're trying to escape? Because there's a moment coming, a shift that changes everything. A moment where you stop trying to convince and start seeing clearly. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. What if the reason nothing ever made sense is because you were trying to solve something that was never yours to begin with? That realization does not come loudly, it does not arrive with certainty at first. It starts as a quiet shift, a small moment where something inside you pauses, and instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" you begin to ask, "Why does this pattern keep repeating?" And that question changes everything. Because for the first time, you are not turning against yourself, you are turning toward the truth. A lesser known psychological fact is this: awareness alone can interrupt emotional conditioning. The moment you consciously recognize a pattern, your brain begins to weaken its hold over you. What once felt automatic starts to lose its power. And that is exactly what begins to happen here. Do not skip this part, because this is where everything finally starts to shift. You begin to replay the connection again, but this time you see it differently. You notice how the distance always followed closeness, how vulnerability was often met with withdrawal, how moments of connection were followed by confusion, not consistency. And slowly it clicks. This was not random, this was a pattern. And more importantly, it was not created by you. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You were never the reason things felt unstable. You were the one reacting to instability that was already there. And when that truth lands, something inside you softens, not because it erases the pain, but Beka, use it, removes the weight of self blame. You stop replaying every word you said, trying to find a mistake. You stop carrying the belief that if you were just better, calmer, more understanding, things would have worked. Because now you see it clearly. There was nothing you could have done to change something that was never within your control. And that clarity, it feels like a release, a deep exhale you did not realize you were holding. You start to feel your energy coming back, not all at once, but in small ways. Your thoughts become quieter. The constant overanalyzing begins to slow down. The need to explain yourself fades, and in its place, something new begins to rise: self trust. You start to trust how you felt in those moments. You start to trust that the confusion was not your fault. You start to trust that your need for clarity, for consistency, for emotional safety was valid. And for the first time in a long time, you feel aligned with yourself again. But this is also the moment where a deeper emotion can surface: grief. Not just for the person, but for the version of you that tried so hard, the version of you that gave everything, that stayed longer than you should have, that carried more than you were meant to carry. And instead of judging that version of you, you begin to understand it. You see that you were not weak. You were open. You were not too much. You were real. And that realization changes the way you see everything that happened. Because now it is no longer a story of rejection, it is a story of awakening. But this is not the end of the shift, because once you realize something was never yours, the next step is learning how to let it go completely. And that is where true transformation begins. And what I'm about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. What does it actually feel like the moment you stop carry? Ink what was never yours. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is quiet, almost unfamiliar, like setting down a weight you forgot you were holding. For so long, your energy was tied up in trying to understand, trying to fix, trying to hold everything together. And now there is space. A lesser known psychological fact is this: your nervous system cannot fully regulate while it is carrying unresolved emotional responsibility that does not belong to you. The moment you release that responsibility, your body begins to return to balance almost immediately. And that is the shift you start to feel. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people take their power back. You stop over explaining, you stop chasing clarity, you stop trying to manage someone else's emotions just to keep the connection alive. And what replaces all of that effort is stillness, not the empty kind, the grounded kind. You begin to detach, but not from a place of anger, not from resentment, not from needing to prove anything. You detach because you finally see clearly. You understand what happened without needing them to confirm it. And that changes the energy completely. You are no longer reacting, you're choosing. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. Letting go is not about losing them, it is about no longer losing yourself. And in that space, something powerful happens. You return to your center, your thoughts feel like your own again, your emotions feel lighter. You are no longer filtering yourself through someone else's reactions. You speak freely again, you feel fully again, you exist without constantly questioning your worth. But at the same time, a deeper understanding begins to form, because once you are no longer inside the confusion, you can finally see them clearly too. Not through attachment, but through awareness. And what you begin to notice is something they never shew, wed you, an internal conflict that was always there, a silent tension between wanting connection and fearing it at the same time. They felt the pull toward you, the closeness, the safety. But at the same time, that closeness triggered something deeper: a fear of being exposed, a fear of not being enough, a fear of losing control. So they moved back, not because you were wrong, but because being close to you forced them to face something within themselves they were not ready to face. And that is why they may never admit the truth, because admitting it would mean sitting with their own shame, their own patterns, their own responsibility. And for someone who escapes those feelings, that is the hardest thing to do. So instead, they distance, they deflect, they convince themselves of a different story. And for a long time, you believe that story too, but not anymore, because now you see both sides. You see what happened to you, and you see what was happening inside them. And that is where something deeper settles within you. Not anger, not blame, understanding. And from that understanding comes your final realization that you were never the mistake. You were the moment that revealed the truth. You were the connection that brought everything to the surface. You were the mirror that reflected what they were not ready to face. And most importantly, you were the person who stayed long enough to wake up. This was never just a relationship, it was a turning point. A moment that forced you to see your worth, your boundaries, your depth in a way you never had before. You did not lose them. You found yourself in the process of almost losing yourself. And that changes everything because now you do not need closure from them. You have clarity within yourself, and that clarity brings something you have not felt in a long time: peace. But there is one final piece, one final shift that most people miss even after all of this. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. Everything you just experienced in this video, the confusion, the self doubt, the exhaustion, and finally the clarity, it was all part of a journey. A journey that was never about proving yourself to anyone else. It was about discovering what is truly yours and what was never meant to be carried by you. You followed along as we peeled back the layers of projection, avoidance, and unspoken shame. And step by step, you began to see the patterns that kept you spinning in circles. And now, after all of that, there is something important I want you to hold close. You are not broken. You are not the cause of their distance or their fear. Every moment that felt heavy, every time you question yourself, it was a mirror showing you how deep your heart truly is. You were never the mistake, you were the lesson, the awakening, the one who stayed connected to yourself even when the world around you seemed confusing. Do not skip this part because this is where most people miss the most important insight. The truth is simple, but it changes everything. You cannot heal someone else's shame, and you cannot carry someone else's unresolved emotions without losing pieces of yourself. When you let go of what is not yours, when you reclaim your energy and your identity, you create space for life to meet you in a way that feels natural, effortless, and whole. You do not need validation from them. You do not need proof. Your worth is inherent, your love is enough, and your presence is powerful even when it goes unseen by someone else. Everything you just heard, you already knew. Deep inside, you just needed someone to remind you. That quiet voice in your heart, the one that has been questioning, doubting, and feeling alone, it was waiting for permission to speak, to guide you back to yourself. That voice is strong, and now it can lead you into your own clarity, your own center, your own peace. Before you go, read this one last thing carefully. This might be the most important thing in this entire video. You do not need to fix anyone else's story. You do not need to carry the weight of their shame. Your job is to remain true to yourself, to protect your energy, and to honor your heart. That is where your freedom lies. That is where transformation begins. If this message resonates with you, if it feels like a reminder you needed, then stay connected here. Subscribe and like, not because you have to, but because this is a space that will continue to remind you of your worth, your growth, and the power that is already within you. You are strong, you are awake, and you are exactly where you are meant to be.